Trump's DOJ just said they ain't gonna back up the 21 and over handgun rule, and that's a law that's been on the books since 1968. If this sticks, and one 8-year-old can walk into a gun shop and buy a pistol for the first time in over 50 years. Now tell me that ain't a game changer. What's up, everyone? This is Ted from Line 45, and today, we're gonna dig into how Trump's DOJ just flipped the script on the Gun Control Act, what it means if you're 18 and want to buy a pistol, and why this could shake the gun world harder than anything we've seen in decades. Before we dive in, do me a solid. Smash that subscribe, tap the bell, hit all the dang buttons down there. You don't gotta, but it keeps this train rolling and lets me crank out more of this wild gun talk for y'all. All right, enough of that. Let's get back to it. The bombshell announcement. Here's the scoop, y'all. Trump's DOJ just let the clock run out on defending the 21 and over handgun rule. That law's been sitting in the Gun Control Act since 1968, and now, thanks to a Fifth Circuit ruling, it's looking shaky as hell. The judges said plain and simple, under the Bruin standard, you can't keep 18 to 21-year-olds from buying a pistol from a licensed dealer. And the DOJ? They didn't appeal, didn't fight it. They just let it ride. That's 50-plus years of the way it's always been, about to get flipped on its head. Now, don't run out to your local gun shop thinking it's open season just yet. Most FFLs are still sitting tight, because ATF hasn't dropped new guidance. No dealer wants to risk their license on a gray area sale. But here's the real kicker. We've now got a full-on circuit split. Down south, the Fifth Circuit says the ban's unconstitutional. Over in the Fourth Circuit, judges upheld it. And when two courts are butting heads like that, that's Supreme Court territory. And it's coming. So even if you're not 19 and looking for your first carry gun, this matters. It's not just about one law. It's about how far the government's power goes to carve out exceptions to your rights. If the DOJ ain't defending this piece of the Gun Control Act, what's next on the chopping block? And to answer that, we gotta rewind to 1968, when America was in chaos, and this law got stamped in the first place. A law born in crisis. All right, let's roll it back to where this whole mess started. In 1968, America was in shock. In just a few short years, we lost President John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King Jr., and Robert F. Kennedy, all to assassins with guns. Folks were scared, the government was under pressure, and President Lyndon Johnson jumped on that moment to push through what became the Gun Control Act of 1968. Now here's the part that matters for us today. Tucked into that law was the age restriction we're talking about. Congress decided that anyone under 21 couldn't buy a handgun from a licensed dealer. The argument back then? Young adults, especially those aged 18 to 20, were seen as more likely to commit crimes, and handguns, being small and easy to conceal, were the ones politicians feared the most. They thought cutting off that supply would stop violence. But here's the irony. Even after that law passed, 18-year-olds could still legally own handguns. They just couldn't buy them from an FFL. That means if your dad gave you a revolver, or you bought one in a private sale, you were good to go. The law wasn't airtight. It was political theater meant to show action after national tragedies. And for the next 5 decades, it sat there unquestioned, with both Republicans and Democrats defending it. Fast forward to today, courts are looking at that exact history and asking, was this really about public safety, or just about lawmakers trying to look tough in a chaotic time? And that's where the cracks in this old law started showing. So let's break down how the loopholes were always there, hiding in plain sight. The loophole that was always there. Here's the funny part about that 21 and over rule. It never actually stopped 18 to 20-year-olds from owning handguns. All it did was block them from buying through an FFL, the licensed dealer at your local gun shop. The law didn't touch private transfers and didn't touch family gifts. So, if your uncle handed down his old Colt, or you picked up a revolver through a personal sale, totally legal. That loophole has been baked in since day one. And that's where the whole thing starts to look more like political theater than real crime prevention. Think about it. If the idea was to keep handguns out of young hands, why leave the back door wide open? It's because lawmakers in 2068 wanted a headline win after all those high-profile assassinations, not a full-on fix, and the numbers never lined up anyway. Studies show that only about 1% of legally purchased handguns by that age group ever turn up in crimes. Meanwhile, a quarter of crimes involve offenders between 18 and 20. So the problem was never the legal buyers. It was everything happening outside the law. But here's where it matters. That contradiction is exactly what courts are chewing on today. If an 8-year-old can vote, enlist, and legally own a handgun through a gift, what sense does it make to ban him from buying one at the counter? It's the kind of inconsistency the Bruen test was designed to expose. And speaking of Bruen, that Supreme Court case changed the whole game. Let's get into how it flipped the standard for every gun law on the books. Bruen changed everything. Here's where the whole game flipped on its head. Back in 2022, the Supreme Court told every judge in America, quit playing lawyer games with the Second Amendment. Before that, courts could rubber stamp gun laws with the old public safety excuse. Basically, they'd say, yeah, it trims your rights, but hey, it makes folks safer. And that's how the 2-1-and-over rule kept hanging on for decades. But Bruen? That ruling nuked the playbook. The court laid it down plainly. If you're going to restrict gun rights, you better show it lines up with the text, history, and tradition of this country. Not what feels right, not what polls say, what the founders were actually doing. And in the late 1702nd, 18-year-olds were considered full-grown men, militia-ready, expected to bring their own muskets to muster. There ain't no record of folks saying, hold up, son, you need to wait 3 years before you touch a firearm. That's why the Fifth Circuit looked at the Gun Control Act's 21-plus handgun rule and said, nope, don't pass the smell test. No history, no tradition, just unconstitutional. Simple as that. Now, Trump's DOJ had a choice. They could have jumped in, appealed it, and begged the Supreme Court to back the law. But they didn't. They sat on their hands and let that clock run out. That's not just a court dropping the hammer. That's the executive branch stepping back and saying, we're done defending this one. And that right there sets the stage for Trump's DOJ stepping aside and letting this old law start to crumble. Trump's DOJ, step back. Washington's been playing the same tune for half a century. Every time the 21-and-over handgun rule got challenged, the DOJ would jump in, file the appeal, and keep it alive. Didn't matter if it was a Republican or a Democrat in the White House. The Gun Control Act was treated like sacred ground. This time, though, different story. The Fifth Circuit knocked the law down, and Trump's DOJ just let it lie. No appeal, no fight, nothing. That move said more than any press conference ever could. When the government refuses to defend its own law, it's basically admitting the foundation's cracked. For gun owners, that's a signal you can't ignore. It's not just one case in one court. It's the executive branch stepping out of the ring and letting the chips fall. Now, the practical side. Don't expect your local FFL to hand a pistol across the counter to an 8-year-old tomorrow morning. ATF hasn't issued updated guidance, and most dealers aren't about to risk their license guessing which way the wind blows. But the shift is real. Courts are calling the rule unconstitutional, and the DOJ isn't standing guard anymore. That's not business as usual. That's the start of a turning point. And if you're wondering how far that shift reaches, stick around. The ripple effect. Once the DOJ walked away, the whole playing field changed. Down south, in the Fifth Circuit, Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, this ruling stands, which means the 21-and-over rule is effectively dead there. But jump over to the Fourth Circuit, and judges said the exact opposite, ruling the age limit is fine under history and tradition. That's what lawyers call a circuit split. And when two federal courts flat-out disagree on a constitutional question, the Supreme Court almost has to step in. Here's why that matters. Until SCOTUS makes a final call, gun shops and gun owners are stuck in limbo. Some dealers are holding off because the ATF hasn't given new instructions, and nobody wants to be the first test case. But make no mistake, this isn't going to stay local for long. Once the High Court takes it up, we're talking about a decision that could apply to every gun counter in America. And this ripple goes beyond just age limits. If the 21-plus handgun rule falls under Bruen, other carve-outs are suddenly on shaky ground, too. Things like certain carry restrictions or bans targeted at narrow groups. Every law that doesn't have deep roots in American tradition just became fair game. So this fight isn't just about 18 to 20-year-olds walking into a gun shop. It's about what the Second Amendment means nationwide going forward. And to really understand the weight of that, we've got to step back and ask the bigger question. What does adulthood mean in America? Here's the takeaway. Think about this for a second. At 18, you can vote. You can sign your life away on a mortgage. You can get married, join the military, and Uncle Sam will hand you an M4 and ship you across the world. But here at home, for over 50 years, You couldn't walk into your local shop and buy a simple pistol to protect yourself. That ain't just inconsistent. It's downright backwards. This fight goes way deeper than gun counters and paperwork. It's about what being an adult in America actually means. If we're trusted to die for our country at 18, why not trust every constitutional right in the book? The government's been picking and choosing, and the cracks are finally showing. And the numbers? They don't back the old argument. Less than 1% of legally bought handguns by 18 to 20-year-olds ever get tied to crime. Meanwhile, nearly a quarter of violent crime is committed by that age group, so the law punishes the legal crowd while doing squat against the real problem. It never fixed anything. It just made it harder for law-abiding young adults to defend themselves. So here's where we land. This is bigger than pistols, bigger than hunting, bigger than carry permits. It's about whether you're a full adult at 18 or just an almost adult in the government's eyes. And with the Supreme Court staring this one down, that answer's about to get really clear.